It looked like a horror movie. A man found dead inside his own home, surrounded by cages of snakes, scorpions, and spiders. But it wasn't the snakes that killed him. It wasn't the scorpions either. It was the tiniest of them all, his black widow spiders. Bitten again and again, their venom shut his body down, until he never got back up. This is the story of the collector who loved deadly creatures, until they turned on him. He lived in a quiet American neighborhood. To most, he was just another reclusive man keeping to himself. But inside his modest home was a secret world, a private menagerie of the deadliest creatures on Earth. Rows of glass tanks lined the walls, crawling with exotic scorpions, venomous snakes, and spiders most people only see in nightmares. And among them, tucked away in the dim light, lurked his pride and obsession: black widow spiders. Tiny, glossy bodies marked with a crimson hourglass, their presence barely noticeable until it was too late. To friends and neighbors, he was a harmless eccentric. But behind closed doors, he walked a razor-thin line between fascination and fatal danger. Every feeding, every cleaning of those cages carried the chance of a bite that could kill. Yet he believed he had control. He believed they respected him. But nature doesn't respect ownership. And as the world would soon discover, the creatures he loved were not pets. They were predators, waiting for the smallest mistake. To the untrained eye, black widows look fragile, almost delicate, but their beauty hides one of nature's most efficient killers. Just a drop of their venom is 15 times more potent than a rattlesnake's, a neurotoxin that shuts down the body from the inside out. He knew this. He studied their habits, their webs stretched like death traps across glass walls. He watched with fascination as they dangled upside down, waiting for prey to wander too close. He marveled at the way a single strike could immobilize an insect in seconds. But to him, this was not fear, it was a lure. Each jar, each tank he kept, was a glimpse into the raw power of survival itself. He didn't just collect spiders, he surrounded himself with them, as if their venomous presence gave him a sense of control over mortality. Yet there was no barrier strong enough to erase the truth. In that cramped room filled with webs and shadows, he had invited killers into his home. Silent, patient killers. And as their numbers grew, so did the chance that one day he would no longer be the collector, but the prey. It happened quickly, almost too quickly to understand. One careless movement in that dim, cluttered room, one slip of concentration, and the collector felt it. A sharp sting, like a hot needle driving into his skin. Then another, and another. He pulled back instinctively, eyes darting toward the black shape retreating into its webbed corner. A black widow. Its crimson hourglass flashed like a warning he could no longer ignore. His hand burned, the pain spreading in fiery tendrils up his arm. Within minutes, the venom began its silent work, his muscles tightening, his chest constricting. The room that once felt like his sanctuary suddenly became a trap. Every tank, every jar, every glistening web stared back at him, not as marvels of nature, but as executioners waiting their turn. He tried to steady his breath, but each inhale came ragged, shallow. He was not in control, not anymore. For years he had lived among predators, believing his knowledge and calm hands could keep him safe. But now, as venom coursed through his veins, he realized the chilling truth. He had let death live under his roof, and it had finally claimed him. The pain didn't stay in his hand. It spread like wildfire. His arm cramped, fingers curling into claws he couldn't unclench. Soon his chest seized, every breath turning into a shallow gasp. Black widow venom isn't meant to kill outright. It's meant to incapacitate, to torture. And that's exactly what it was doing. His muscles pulsed with waves of unbearable spasms. His stomach twisted as if gripped by an invisible fist, forcing him to double over. Sweat poured down his face. His vision blurred. Panic set in. He staggered across the room, surrounded by the eerie silence of his creatures, the scorpions shifting in their sand, snakes coiled behind glass, the spiderwebs shimmering faintly under the dim light. They watched, or so it seemed, as their keeper fought to stay on his feet. He wanted to call for help, but he knew the truth. His secret was too big. The cages, the illegal collection. If someone came, it would all be exposed. His silence sealed his fate. Alone, trembling, he sank to the floor, his body a prison of agony. With every spasm, every rattling breath, the venom's grip tightened, and the collector who thought he could tame death realized he had locked himself inside with it. The venom didn't relent, it only grew stronger. His breath shortened, ragged and desperate, chest tightening as if a vice were crushing his ribs. His heart pounded erratically, slamming against his sternum one moment, fluttering weakly the next. He stumbled through the dim room, surrounded by glass cages that rattled as he knocked into them, shadows of fangs and stingers flickering across the walls. Every step was heavier than the last. His knees buckled, muscles twitching uncontrollably, until the strength simply gave out. He crashed to the floor, gasping in the dust of his own forgotten collection. The spiders he prized so dearly remained silent in their glass prisons, their thin legs twitching as if they knew. The snakes pressed their coils against the enclosures. The scorpions shifted in the sand. His kingdom of killers watched as their master lay dying, unable to move, unable to call for help. His vision tunneled. The world shrank to the sound of his own uneven heartbeat, thudding slower, weaker, until finally, there was nothing. The man who had built a life surrounded by venom and fangs had become their final victim, and his body would remain there cold, still, and alone, until someone finally stumbled upon the horror waiting inside. The house was silent, too silent. When neighbors noticed days had passed without seeing him outside, concern grew. Finally, someone forced open the door only to be hit by the suffocating stench of decay. Inside, it was chaos frozen in time. Glass cages lined the walls, some stacked precariously, filled with spiders, scorpions, and snakes. The air was thick, warm, and alive with the faint skittering of legs on glass. And there, in the middle of the room, lay his body, pale, twisted, and already beginning to break down. His arms were peppered with swelling bite marks, angry red and black, evidence of venom coursing through him in his last moments. His eyes were half open, locked in a frozen stare of agony. Rescuers hesitated to approach. Every step into the room was a gamble one wrong move, and a spider could escape. One cage slip, and a snake could strike. But as grim as the scene was, one thing was clear. His obsession had consumed him, leaving behind a death chamber of his own making. The discovery was not just shocking, it was grotesque. A collector had died not in glory but in silence, surrounded by the very monsters he thought he controlled. Authorities stepped into the house as if entering a war zone. Flashlights cut through the gloom, illuminating glass terrariums stacked like coffins against the walls. Inside, creatures shifted black widows dangling by threads, tarantulas pacing restlessly, scorpions rattling in defiance. The rescuers moved slowly. Every breath felt dangerous. A single jar toppled by accident, and dozens of venomous spiders could scatter into the shadows. The room wasn't just a scene of death. It was alive, bristling with predators waiting in silence. One officer whispered, "This isn't a home. It's a death trap." Gloved hands reached for cages, one at a time. Some lids were barely secured, others rusted shut, making every removal a gamble. The black widows, sleek and shiny, pulsed with menace under the beams of light. Each capture felt like dismantling a bomb, except here, the fuse had fangs. The deeper they went, the more surreal it became. Snakes hissed from glass tanks. Shadows crawled along the floor. Even hardened officials admitted the scene felt cursed-like, stepping into the lair of a man who had crossed the line between fascination and madness. This was no ordinary collection. It was a living arsenal, and it had already claimed its owner. Outside the house, the neighbors gathered, pale-faced, whispering in disbelief. For years they had waved politely, never knowing that just a thin wall separated their children's bedrooms from one of the deadliest private collections in America. As officials carried out crates of spiders, snakes, and scorpions, the crowd gasped. Some were marked extremely venomous. Others were unknown, their labels handwritten, smudged. A few terrariums had no labels at all. One mother clutched her son and muttered, "He could have killed us all without even meaning to." The thought was chilling. What if just one black widow had slipped free, crawling through vents or floorboards? What if a snake had escaped into the yard? The danger wasn't just confined to the man who kept them. It had been lurking over the entire block, invisible and silent. Officials warned that some spiders may already have gotten loose. The word spread panic through the crowd. People scanned their own porches, their gardens, suddenly imagining dark shapes in every corner. In that moment, it wasn't just the death of one eccentric collector being processed. It was the terrifying revelation of how close the neighborhood had come to disaster. The man's obsession hadn't just killed him, it had endangered everyone. The coroner's report stripped away any mystery. The man hadn't died suddenly, he had suffered. His body carried the unmistakable marks of Black Widow venom. Small, searing puncture wounds on his hands and forearms where the spiders had struck. Within minutes of those bites, the neurotoxin would have begun its savage work. His muscles seized, locking in spasms so violent they could snap bone. His chest clenched as though bound in iron bands, every breath a battle. His abdomen twisted in cramps so severe that witnesses of widow bites often mistake them for appendicitis. But he hadn't called for help. Surrounded by the very creatures he loved, he tried to endure the agony alone. The venom spread, burning through his nervous system, turning his body into a prison of pain. When his heart finally gave out, it was not peaceful. His face was contorted, his skin slick with sweat, his body rigid. He had been trapped in a private torture chamber of his own making, and all around him, in their glass cages, the Black Widows sat motionless, their crimson hourglass glowing in the dim light. Silent executioners watching their collector succumb to their venom. Among all the creatures in his secret menagerie, one stood apart in infamy. The Black Widow spider, small, fragile-looking, and almost delicate, but inside her tiny body lurks one of the most potent venoms in the animal kingdom. A single bite injects enough neurotoxin to shut down the human nervous system, sending waves of agony through muscle and nerve. Victims describe it as if their insides are being wrung out, their bodies hijacked by an invisible hand. It rarely kills when medical care is given, but left untreated, it can stop the heart. And that was the cruel irony. The collector surrounded himself with danger, confident in his skill, certain that he was in control. But with Black Widows, there is no second chance. Unlike the snakes or scorpions he kept, whose strikes could sometimes be survived. The widow's bite is silent, almost invisible, until it's far too late. To the outside world, they were mere pets in glass cages. To him, they were trophies. But in the end, the Black Widow reminded everyone why it has earned its name. A predator that can take down prey 10 times its size, and now, a man who thought he could tame it. When rescuers finally forced open the door to his home, they stepped into a nightmare. Every wall seemed alive. Glass tanks lined the room, stacked in rows, filled with scorpions, snakes, and spiders, some common, others so rare they were barely known outside textbooks. But it was the spiders that dominated the scene. Black widows, redbacks, even tarantulas, dozens of them, silken webs stretching across their enclosures like curtains in a haunted house. The air was thick, stale, with the unsettling rustle of legs against glass. At the center of it all, they found him, motionless. His body bore the unmistakable marks of multiple bites, crimson punctures against pale skin. The very creatures he collected, studied, and admired had become his executioners. The room that once fed his obsession was now his tomb. Neighbors later said they had no idea what he was hiding inside. To them, he was quiet, private. But behind those closed doors was a private zoo of lethal predators, an obsession that ended in the most horrifying way imaginable. This wasn't just a home, it was a death trap, one that finally claimed its owner. For most of us, a Black Widow is a creature to fear, to avoid at all costs. But for him, it was something to hold, to study, to claim mastery over. His secret collection was more than a hobby, it was a compulsion. A need to surround himself with the world's most venomous predators, as if courting death itself. And in the end, that obsession wrote his fate. The spiders he fed, the creatures he admired, delivered the final judgment. It wasn't malice, it wasn't vengeance, it was instinct. The raw rule of nature. Strike when threatened, kill when cornered. His death is a chilling reminder. Some lines should never be crossed. Some creatures should never be kept. What begins as fascination can quickly become fixation, and what seems like control is often just an illusion. He thought he could master the deadly, but in the end, the deadly mastered him. Before you go, remember these true stories remind us just how fragile the line is between fascination and fatality. If this video gripped you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story of humans and nature colliding in the most shocking ways. And coming up next, we dive into another case where a seemingly ordinary day spiraled into unthinkable horror. You won't want to miss it. Stay safe, stay alert, and I'll see you in the next video. Florida, 2019. A frantic 911 call echoes through the dispatcher's line. A man's down, attacked by a bird. But this was no ordinary bird. It was a cassowary, 6 feet tall, 130 pounds. The quiet back roads outside Gainesville, Florida, hid a secret most neighbors barely understood. Behind a modest farm fence, 75-year-old Marvin Hajos kept animals unlike anything the average Floridian would ever expect to see. He wasn't raising chickens, goats, or cattle. His passion was far stranger: exotic birds, some among the rarest and most dangerous on Earth. Visitors described the farm as both fascinating and unsettling. Tall enclosures lined the property, filled with parrots, peafowl, emus, and at its heart, 2 towering cassowaries. To the untrained eye, they looked almost prehistoric. 6-foot, flightless giants, with jet-black feathers, turquoise-blue heads, and a thick helmet-like casque rising above their eyes. They didn't chirp, they hissed. And when they walked, their clawed reptilian feet echoed like something out of the Jurassic era. Marvin adored them. To him, they weren't monsters, they were treasures. He had spent decades collecting and breeding exotic birds, caring for them with the dedication of a man who felt more at home among animals than people. Friends say his entire life revolved around his flock, that he often spoke about their intelligence, their mystery, their beauty. But beauty can hide danger. The cassowary, in particular, carried a reputation like no other. Nicknamed the world's most dangerous bird, it possessed claws sharp enough to gut a grown man in seconds. Wildlife experts warned against keeping them as pets, but Marvin believed his experience and care kept him safe. He had raised these birds, fed them daily, and earned their trust. Or so he thought. On this farm, a fragile balance existed between a man who loved exotic creatures and the exotic creatures that could kill him in an instant. And on one April morning in 2019, that balance shattered. April 12th, 2019. The sun had barely risen over Gainesville when Marvin Hajos stepped outside. At 75, most men would be enjoying retirement, moving slower, letting their mornings pass in peace. But not Marvin. For him, every day began the same way, checking on the birds. He walked the property with quiet purpose. First the parrots, squawking for their breakfast. Then the peafowl, strutting proudly in the morning light. The emus hissed softly, pacing their pens. To Marvin, each animal was a companion, a part of the family he had built over decades. But all of it led to one place, the cassowary enclosure. Inside stood Mary, the giant, prehistoric-looking bird that towered over Marvin's waist. Jet-black feathers glistened in the sun. The creature's head shimmered with brilliant blue skin, the casque rising like a crown of bone. Its eyes, cold, golden, unblinking, watched Marvin's every move. To outsiders, a cassowary was nightmare fuel. To Marvin, it was routine. He moved slowly, calmly, tossing feed and clearing the ground. He knew the risks. Every handler did. One trip, one stumble, one wrong move in front of those dagger-like claws, and the balance of trust could shatter. But Marvin believed in his bond. He had walked into this enclosure 1,000 times. He wasn't careless. He was confident. What he didn't know was that today, a single misstep would set off a chain of events that would turn his morning routine into a scene of unthinkable horror. The cassowary was watching, waiting, and Marvin was about to make the fatal mistake of letting his guard down, just once. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Marvin stepped carefully along the edge of the cassowary enclosure, a bucket of feed in his hand. He had done this walk countless times, but at 75 years old, his balance wasn't what it used to be. The ground beneath him was uneven, a mixture of soft dirt and exposed roots from the trees shading the pen. One misstep, that's all it took. Marvin's foot slid, the bucket clattered against the ground, and his body pitched forward. In that split second, his world flipped. He wasn't standing tall, the calm keeper in control. He was down, helpless, sprawled in the dust, the breath knocked out of his chest. And the cassowary noticed. The bird's head snapped up, its golden eyes locking onto him. To a cassowary, a sudden fall meant one thing: weakness, vulnerability, a threat, or worse, prey. Marvin scrambled, trying to push himself upright, but his age betrayed him. His movements were slow, unsteady. The cassowary advanced with deliberate, powerful strides, its talons clicking against the earth like knives dragged across stone. This was no farm bird. This was a living relic of prehistory, armed with claws sharp enough to disembowel a man with a single kick. Marvin's heart must have pounded as he realized what was happening. He was trapped in the worst possible position, flat on the ground, face to face with the most dangerous bird on Earth. The cassowary lowered its head, feathers bristling, throat rumbling with a low, growl-like sound. Marvin had fallen, literally, into a death zone, and now the bird was coming for him. The cassowary lunged. In an instant, the bird closed the gap, its towering body blotting out the sun. Marvin barely had time to raise his arms before the first blow landed. The cassowary's foot, a weapon as deadly as a tiger's claw, came down with terrifying precision. The inner toe, capped with a 5-inch dagger-like talon, slashed through flesh like paper. The sound was sickening, a tearing rip, followed by Marvin's cry of pain. Blood sprayed across the dirt as the cassowary reared back, only to strike again. Each kick carried the weight of a 130-pound bird built for violence. This wasn't flailing. It was methodical, targeted, as though the cassowary knew exactly how to disable a threat. Its wings flared wide for balance, and its massive legs drove downward, again and again, stabbing and ripping. Marvin tried to roll, tried to push himself away, but the enclosure offered no escape. The cassowary loomed above him, relentless, its talons hammering into his torso. A deep gash opened across his abdomen. His breaths came ragged, desperate, as the claws carved into him. For decades, Marvin had raised exotic birds. He had admired them, cared for them, even defended them. But now, the bird he had chosen to keep, the one others called a living dinosaur, was dismantling him with prehistoric fury. The ground beneath him was red, his body weakened with every strike. And in those horrifying moments, one truth was undeniable. The cassowary had become the executioner. Marvin lay sprawled in the dirt, his body shredded by wounds that bled freely into the ground. The cassowary circled him, towering, unblinking, its blue neck bobbing like a predator watching its prey weaken. Every attempt Marvin made to push himself up sent pain ripping through his abdomen where the talons had torn deep. His breaths grew ragged, each inhaling a battle, each exhaling a surrender. The massive bird tilted its head, studying him with eerie stillness. It didn't need to strike again. The damage was already catastrophic. The enclosure, once a space he had walked with ease, now felt like a prison. The high fences closed him in, no path to safety, no door within reach. Marvin's hands, slick with blood, clawed weakly at the earth as he tried to crawl toward the gate. Just a few more feet, just one chance. But his strength was draining faster than the blood leaving his body. Outside, the farm was quiet. No one heard his calls. No one came running. Time stretched into cruel silence, broken only by the rasp of his gasps and the soft, heavy thump of the cassowary's steps in the dust. Marvin, the man who had spent his life among exotic creatures, was now trapped in the most horrifying irony. Dying not in the wild jungles of Papua New Guinea, but in his own backyard, at the mercy of the bird he believed he understood. In those final minutes alone, the farm became a battlefield, and the cassowary, the undisputed victor. Morning light broke over Gainesville, casting long shadows across Marvin Hajo's farm. For hours, the cassowary stalked its enclosure in silence, as if nothing had happened. But just beyond the fence, a horror waited to be found. It was a neighbor who first noticed something was wrong. The farm, usually humming with Marvin's presence, was too quiet. No movement, no signs of the man who had always been up at dawn. When he called out, there was no answer. And then, he saw it. Inside the enclosure, Marvin's body lay motionless in the dirt. His clothes torn, his skin marked with deep, gaping slashes. The bright, terrible red of blood had soaked into the soil. Nearby, the cassowary loomed like a sentinel, its piercing eyes fixed on the scene it had created. The 911 call came quickly, panic, disbelief, and urgency crackling through the line. "There's a man down," He's been attacked by his bird. It's one of those giant cassowaries. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but what greeted them was chaos. They couldn't approach immediately. The cassowary, 6 feet of muscle and claws, still paced the enclosure, feathers bristling, as if daring anyone to step closer. The bird that had gored its owner now stood guard over his body, a living wall of danger. Only once the bird was distracted could responders reach Marvin. But even then, it was too late. The wounds were catastrophic. Slashes across his arms, his torso, his legs. The talons had done their work with brutal efficiency. Marvin was still breathing when they reached him, but barely. Each breath was shallow, fading. His eyes fluttered open only for a moment, then closed again. As they lifted him from the ground, the reality became clear. This was not just a farm accident. It was something primal. A man, gored by what is often called a living dinosaur, a creature that had turned his passion into his undoing. Within hours, the farm that Marvin had built with pride was sealed off with police tape, and the cassowary, his prized bird, was no longer just an exotic pet. It was evidence. To look at a cassowary is to see a relic of prehistory, standing nearly 6 feet tall, weighing up to 130 pounds. This bird is not flightless by weakness. It is built for war. A thick helmet-like casque crowns its head. Its body is armored in dense, bristling feathers that resemble coarse hair. But it is the legs that make the cassowary feared above all other birds. Each leg is like a coiled spring, capable of propelling the animal through dense rainforest at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. At the end of each foot, 3 toes, 2 unremarkable, 1 utterly lethal. That inner claw, curved like a dagger, grows as long as 5 inches. Sharp, solid keratin. It doesn't just cut, it disembowels. When a cassowary strikes, it kicks forward and down, driving that claw into flesh with the force of a heavyweight's punch. Hunters in Papua New Guinea, who know this bird better than anyone, say it can open a man from chest to stomach with a single blow. That's not a myth. That's anatomy. Marvin Hayos had kept cassowaries for years. He admired their strangeness, their beauty, their rarity. But admiration does not erase danger. Experts warn that cassowaries are the only bird alive today that can truly kill a human without hesitation. They've split open dogs, maimed livestock, even sent hunters fleeing through the jungle. The Guinness Book of Records lists them as the most dangerous bird in the world, for a reason. And in Marvin's case, all of that power was concentrated in a single moment, when he fell to the ground, vulnerable, and the cassowary lashed out. Not once, not twice, but over and over. Every kick is a statement of dominance. Every strike a reminder that this bird, despite being raised in captivity, had never lost its wild, primal edge. For decades, people joked that cassowaries looked like modern dinosaurs. In Gainesville, Florida, that metaphor became literal. A man had been gored to death not by a lion or a crocodile, but by a bird. As word spread, the property became a scene out of a nightmare. Deputies and wildlife officers arrived, but there was no calm, only tension. Because while Marvin Hayos lay dying, the cassowary still prowled the enclosure. A bird that could disembowel a man with one strike. And had just done so. Authorities knew this wasn't like dealing with a stray dog or even a wild alligator. The cassowary was unpredictable, lightning fast, and capable of turning on anyone who came too close. Officers cautiously circled the pen, their weapons ready, every eye locked on the towering bird pacing just feet away. The cassowary hissed, its deep booming call echoing through the farm. Its long, talon-like middle claw, 5 inches of curved, knife-sharp bone, scraped against the dirt. To the deputies, it wasn't an exotic pet anymore. It was a living weapon, a reminder of why this species is called the world's most dangerous bird. But there was another complication. The bird wasn't wild. It was property. Florida law considered it a captive animal, and that meant authorities couldn't simply storm in and kill it. They had to restrain it, subdue it, and relocate it, without losing another life in the process. So the plan shifted. Wildlife officers brought in specialized gear, tranquilizer darts, and reinforced cages. Getting close enough to deliver the shot was like approaching a predator waiting to pounce. At any moment, one wrong move could send the cassowary charging, claws out, ready to shred anyone in its path. Finally, after hours of tense maneuvering, the tranquilizer dart found its mark. The cassowary staggered, let out a guttural sound, and collapsed. Only then did officers move in to secure it, hands trembling, adrenaline still coursing, knowing they had just subdued the same bird that had ended its owner's life in seconds. For neighbors and first responders watching, the image was chilling. A prehistoric-looking bird, strapped down, carried off in a cage. A killer contained, but not destroyed. Marvin Hajos was gone. The cassowary he had raised was alive, sedated, and destined for relocation. But the question echoed louder than ever. Why had such a creature been allowed to live on a Florida farm in the first place? News of Marvin Hajos's death spread like wildfire, and with it came disbelief. A cassowary, a bird most Floridians had only seen behind reinforced glass at a zoo, had killed a man in his own backyard. For many, it sounded too bizarre to be real. But it wasn't fiction. It was a gruesome reality that shattered the quiet of a Gainesville community. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, recalling the towering bird with its electric blue neck and horn-like casque. Some had occasionally caught glimpses of it pacing the fence line, but none imagined it could be lethal. Now, fear rippled through the area. If this bird could kill its owner, what would happen if it escaped? Reporters descended on the farm, cameras capturing the crude fences, the open pens, and the cages that suddenly looked far too fragile to contain a creature capable of disemboweling a human. Parents clutched their children tighter. Residents demanded answers. How was a private citizen legally allowed to keep such an animal? Florida's exotic animal laws quickly came under fire. Cassowaries were classified as Class II wildlife. Dangerous, yes, but still legal to own with the right permit. It stunned the public. A bird ranked alongside tigers and crocodiles in lethality could be housed in a backyard enclosure, just steps from neighbors. Wildlife officials defended their oversight, pointing out that Hajos had possessed the proper licenses. But to many, that was the problem. The law had allowed a man in his 70s to keep one of the deadliest birds on Earth, and now he had paid with his life. As media headlines branded the cassowary the world's most dangerous bird, a wave of horror rolled beyond Florida. International outlets from London to Sydney reported the story with the same mixture of shock and disbelief. People compared the cassowary to a living dinosaur, and images of its dagger-like claws went viral. But beyond the sensational headlines, locals wrestled with unease. This wasn't an accident on a safari or in a faraway jungle. This was a death caused by a prehistoric predator raised in a suburban Florida farm, and the question that haunted the community was chilling. Had this tragedy exposed a loophole in the thin line separating humans from the wild predators they try to tame? To understand the tragedy, you have to understand Marvin Hajos. At 75, he wasn't a reckless teenager chasing danger. He was a seasoned breeder who had spent decades surrounded by exotic creatures. Friends remembered him as a quiet man, but one consumed by his fascination with rare and unusual animals. For Marvin, cassowaries weren't monsters. They were marvels. He raised them with pride, showing visitors the strange, otherworldly birds, as if he were sharing treasures from another time. But passion can blur into obsession. Neighbors often questioned why he kept such unpredictable creatures on a farm with nothing more than chain-link fencing separating them from the outside world. Marvin would brush off concerns, insisting he understood their behavior, that he could manage them. And for years, he did. Until the morning when a simple misstep, a stumble to the ground, stripped away every illusion of control. The irony was brutal. The man who had devoted his twilight years to protecting and caring for one of nature's most dangerous birds was brought down not by malice, not by recklessness, but by the very animal he trusted. The cassowary did what it was born to do, react with violent, primal force. In the aftermath, those who knew him were left torn between admiration and disbelief. Was Marvin a victim of his own daring love for wildlife, or a cautionary tale of how devotion to dangerous creatures will always carry a cost? His death forced the world to look past the exotic allure and confront the dark reality. Even in captivity, even with years of experience, some animals cannot be tamed. The cassowary is often called a living dinosaur, and in Marvin Hajos's death, That title felt chillingly true. Standing over 6 feet tall, armed with dagger-like talons capable of slicing flesh in a single strike, this bird is nature's reminder of a time when survival was won through raw power and aggression. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't hesitate. It reacts. Marvin's end was not just a freak accident. It was a brutal lesson carved into flesh. A stumble, a heartbeat of vulnerability, and the cassowary's prehistoric instincts surged forward, unstoppable. What happened in that Florida farm wasn't malice. It was nature revealing, without disguise, what it truly is: indifferent, dangerous, uncontainable. The world watched in disbelief. A man who spent his life devoted to exotic animals cut down by the very creature he believed he understood. His story became a warning etched into headlines across the globe. No matter how much we think we've caged nature, the wild always waits, patient, ancient, and ready. Marvin Hajos was remembered as a man who loved fiercely, but who, in his final moments, proved the cost of loving something that was never meant to be owned. Marvin Hajos believed his cassowaries were companions. In the end, one proved it was a killer. His death was as swift as it was shocking, a reminder that some creatures remain forever untamed. If this story gripped you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the most chilling encounters between humans and the wild. And coming up, another tale where ordinary life collides with extraordinary terror. Stay with us. The next story will haunt you.